Well, good evening, everyone. It's Monday, June 23rd, 2014. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission. We have first item.
Roll call. Commissioner Kirkjian.
Here.
Commissioner Sahakian.
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Bartuso.
Here.
Chairperson Yakubian.
Here. Next item.
Item 1B, flag salute. Chairperson Yakubian.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item, Anuj.
Item 2 is posting of the agenda. The agenda for the Monday, June 23rd, 2014 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Friday, June 20th, 2014 before 5:30 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Okay, excellent. Next item.
Item 3 is selection of a new chairperson for the Transportation and Parking Commission for 1 year.
Very good. It's that time of year. We're going to pick a new chairperson. I have a few gray hairs, I'd like to think. Do we have any nominees?
I would like to nominate Commissioner Sahakian as a traffic engineer and somebody who's been here for the longest. Perhaps lead us for next year.
Any other nominations? Okay, would you like to make a motion?
Make a motion?
I will second it. Roll call.
Commissioner Kirkjian.
Yes.
Commissioner Sahakian.
Yes.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yes.
Commissioner Bartuso.
Yes.
Chairperson Yakubian.
Yes. Very good.
Thank you for your confidence in me,
Absolutely.
and you did a great job, Chairperson. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough meetings, and I felt that your term should be extended. But we'll see you back in that seat, I'm pretty sure.
Thanks, Adam.
Oh, that's right. You want to? Yeah. Well, I don't want to be the mayor. You got your plaque? Oh yeah, it's there with you. Okay, cool. Okay, thank you. Next item, please.
Item 4 is approval of minutes at 4A, March 24th, 2014 regular meeting minutes.
Any comments, commissioners?
I move approval of the minutes.
Can I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you. And I think we need to take the next item out of order because the person is not present. Am I correct? It's oral communications. Let's take item 5, please. Jumping to conclusions.
Item 5 is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision.
I do not have any cards for oral communications. Does anybody want to submit a card? If not, I'm going to close oral communications. Next item, please.
Item 6 is information only at 6A, City of Los Angeles Taxi Cab Administrator.
Thank you. And We can't take that out of order, correct? Okay. Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 7 is a public hearing. At 7A is a report regarding application for the removal of preferential parking on the 1600 block of Del Valle Avenue between Cañada Boulevard and Hermosa Avenue.
Again, I don't... Cards, yes. Do we have a presentation on this? Correct.
This segment and preferential parking, sorry.
Oh.
And that constituted an 83% of the residents in favor of the removal. And staff sent a meeting notification to the residents on June 9th. However, consequently, we received 3 residents who requested removal in writing of removal of their signature from the petition, and another 2 who called the office and wanted their names removed. That said, now that reduces the signatures to 19, which equates to 66% of the property owners. And our threshold, as stated in the Glendale Municipal Code, is 75% need to have signed the petition. And as such, I recommend that we move this item from your agenda and move forward and bring it back if there is a revised petition. Okay. But as it stands, the preferential parking restriction will stay as it is today, since we have not received the necessary number of petitioners.
Okay, any comments?
Yeah, I have Mr. Galanian, can someone call in and say, I want my name removed? I mean, is there any verification
yes.
as to who they are? And I mean, it's based on trust that the person calling in is.
So the name, we match the name with property owner's information.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
On the property records.
Okay.
Do we ask them to follow up with a written communication in a case like this?
Yeah, we follow up with a letter that you have requested to be removed from the list of the petition.
Okay.
So they know.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Do we have an obligation to notify the remaining people who signed the petition that this is what happened, or we're putting this off the calendar?
Commissioner Kirkjian will notify all 29 property owners. All of them.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you. So at this time, we want to go back to item number 6. And I see Mr. Drischler sitting there. If you're ready for it, I know you just walked in. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this information only presentation by, and I thank Mr. Drischler for his time this evening, came about as a result of a recommendation by then Commissioner Sahakian and the consent of the rest of the Commission in regards to taxi cabs and the other private firms who are operating within the county.
Yes. Thank you for coming.
Hi. Sorry for the delay. I haven't been to this room before, so I got a little lost.
It's okay.
My name is Tom Drischler. I'm taxi cab administrator for the City of Los Angeles. I'm also chairman of the board of directors of the International Association of Transportation Regulators. And I guess the request is for me to give you an update on what's going on with transportation network companies. That's my understanding.
Yes.
Okay, well.
And a resident of Glendale, you might want to add.
Yes, I am a resident of Glendale. in the near Kenneth Village. I'm very happy to be here. We've been here for a year now. So it's all the more reason I want to come out and be helpful if I can. I'm going to refer to these kinds of operators, Uber, Lyft, what have you, as transportation network companies. That's the term that the Public Utilities Commission gave them last year. They're known, call themselves rideshare companies, but the Public Utilities Commission determined that rideshare was not an appropriate term for them because ride sharing is basically you and a colleague riding in a van pool together to work and with no one making a profit off it. They recognize that these are for-profit companies. And that's really what they are, and that's the key. They're for-profit corporations that use smartphone apps to link drivers of private, non-commercially registered vehicles for hire to riders, and then they take a cut of the revenues generated, usually about 20%. And riders are charged on the basis of time and distance, just as with taxi cabs. Only the fares are determined using smartphone-based GPS de facto taximeters. They are on-demand services, and they cannot be prearranged weeks, days, or even hours in advance. You can't. They're really street hails with the app. If you want to have Uber show up a half an hour from now, you can't order them now. You have to just go down to the street and see if you find them on your app, which in my mind makes them very much like a taxi. And I think it would be helpful for me to discuss how they operate and what their business plans and priorities are. That'll give you some background. First, in terms of background, the two most prominent companies, Uber and Lyft, although just a few years old, are multi-billion-dollar, multinational corporations. And I know there have been some stories in the news the last couple of weeks about Uber being worth $17 million. I think it's probably overstated, but they have a lot of hedge fund money invested in them, Google money, Goldman Sachs, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley. They are not mom-and-pop companies from Main Street. Compared to your local taxi cab and limousine companies, they are very large corporations emanating, at least financially, from the Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Now, what is their objective? Their objective in every market is to operate without any regulation whatsoever and to never pay a dime in permit fees or taxes unless and until they are forced by local authorities to do so. Now, I want to repeat that because this is really key to understanding how they work. They want to operate free of any and all regulations and to never pay any permit fees or taxes, just like they're doing in Glendale right now. They want to put as many vehicles as they can field out onto the streets and work exactly where, how, and when they want them to. Their entire business model is based upon avoiding regulations. And that, in fact, is precisely the basis for their price competitiveness compared with taxis, limousines, and shared ride shuttles. Now, what regulations do they avoid? First and foremost is insurance. In a nutshell, the parent corporation spends little or nothing on insurance, as little or nothing as they can get away with, placing liability on the drivers and the public. So if you were to go onto Uber or Lyft website and sign up to be a driver, you'll get all kinds of warnings saying that you've got to have your insurance in place because you are the one who's going to be held liable. In recent weeks, Uber, in response to criticism from both the State Insurance Commissioner and the Public Utilities Commission, has said that they've added additional coverage. They have a $1 million policy, but all I know is that's what they say on their website. I have not seen a policy. And I do talk with taxi cab company managers from the city of LA who have had accidents with Uber and Lyft and say that they haven't had a claim settled yet. And keep in mind also that on New Year's Eve in San Francisco, there was a 6-year-old girl named Sylvia Liu, who was run over by an Uber driver. The driver had a reckless driving conviction in his past, which according to PUC rules would prevent him from being a driver for one of these transportation network companies. But nonetheless, he killed Sylvia and severely injured her mother, and her brother. And Uber refused to pay or take any responsibility for the accident. And this is now a court case that's ongoing. The family of the little girl suing Uber. But in a state like California, where it costs roughly $7,000 a year to provide comprehensive commercial liability insurance for a single vehicle, if you're talking about a taxi cab or a limousine, spending next to nothing is a tremendous competitive advantage in the vehicle for hire business. They're not spending $7,000 a vehicle. Now, let me just go down a list of other regulations that they avoid. You know, when we talk about regulations, from my point of view, and okay, I'm a career regulator, but and I report to Board of Taxi Cab Commissioners and City of LA Board of Transportation Commissioners, but also the City Council, and all the rules that we have on the books, in my view, are really community standards. It's the standards the city has set for our vehicle for hire operators that we license. So I'm going to go down a list, and if any of these sound unreasonable, stop me. But these are other regulations that these transportation network companies avoid. They do not conduct comprehensive fingerprint-based driver criminal history background checks. So they say they have, they'll say on the website, we do background checks, we're doing a great job with that, but if you're not fingerprinting someone and running those fingerprints through a database, in the City of LA, they're run through the FBI database and the California Department of Justice database. I mean, that's a background check. Anything less than that is not a serious background check. They don't review the driver DMV records. They do not have them on a pull notice program to remove them from the system for driving violations, like we do with the LA taxi drivers. They don't conduct vehicle inspections. They don't adhere to established rates of fare or the use of calibrated or certified taximeters. They do not provide service 24/7. They do not provide service to all areas of town. You can take your smartphone that has an Uber app down to 70th and Central in LA, and you could be there for weeks, and you're never going to get an Uber to show up there. You will get a yellow cab or a bell cab, but they stick to the lucrative areas of town, which, by the way, makes Glendale an attractive little plum for them. But in Los Angeles, they service downtown, west side, and the airport, a little bit in the valley, but they're not in East LA, they're not in South LA, they're not in Pacoima. They go where the upscale market is. They provide no wheelchair accessible services in any market. They're in hundreds of markets, not just nationally but internationally. They do not have one single wheelchair accessible vehicle in any market. And basically what they're saying to the disabled community is, you need transportation, call a cab. Now, in the City of LA, we have 235 wheelchair accessible vehicles among our fleet of 2,361. And that didn't happen by accident. That was a policy that was been set into place by boards, our commissioners from years past, generations past, some who are not with us anymore, who fought for accessibility in our transportation system for our taxi cabs. So that's the aspect of the TNCs that probably bothers me the most. They do not equip their vehicles with any driver or passenger security equipment such as security cameras or partitions. They do not field late model, fuel efficient, low emission, green or hybrid vehicles. They may put some out there. They may have a Prius or two out there, but they're not under any obligation to do so. And you will see full-size Suburbans and other regular cars out there. They have no real mechanism in place for resolving customer and public complaints. There is no limit on the number of vehicles which is related to levels of public convenience and necessity. In Los Angeles, we've limited the number of cabs over the years so that there's a balance. We have 9 companies that are competing very strenuously with each other, but they do so within the framework of public convenience and necessity that's been set up for them. That's set up by the number of vehicles. That's really crucial. But when the Public Utilities Commission licensed these, took jurisdiction over these transportation network companies, they put no limits whatsoever on the number of vehicles they put on the street. So I know in Glendale you have, a little over 60 permitted taxi cabs. Well, you've probably got hundreds of TNCs out there now. And you have no control. They have no driver substance abuse testing process. For taxi cab drivers throughout the state, they're required to have a drug test when they apply for their permits and at least one randomly scheduled drug test per year thereafter. The Public Utilities Commission, when they set up the rules for the TNCs, well, let me explain what their idea of a drug program was. They said, if the customer thinks that the driver is intoxicated, they should send an email to the company of the driver. That is their substance abuse program. But they also do not pay permitting, franchise, or medallion fees or business taxes, including airport access and permit fees. At the end of April, the Public Utilities Commission had an open workshop downtown LA that I attended with there was a council member, Paul Koretz, from the city of LA and other interested parties and staff. One of the things I asked the staff at the PUC was, okay, according to your rules, starting last September, you were supposed to, TNCs were supposed to report the number of trips they do, and they were supposed to pay you 1/3 of 1% of their gross revenue. How much have you collected? And the answer was, we're studying that. So, but I basically got them to admit that they have no idea how many vehicles are out there operating as TNCs, and of course they haven't collected a dime of revenue, which in essence is really a subsidy because they're not collecting any fees from them. But the TNCs also do not provide services to the 42% of the population that do not own smartphones, including 82% of persons 65 and older. They do not provide service to the 29% of the population that do not have credit cards. They do not provide discounted service to seniors through locally subsidized programs. They have no accommodations for the blind service animals. In the city of LA, all the LA taxi cabs have braille signage and have had for the last 15 years. And they are simply not held accountable to elected and appointed commissions, city councils, and mayors. That's why I found it interesting when I was making arrangements to be here and some discussion as to whether or not it's okay for me to come up if an Uber were not going to be here. But my reaction was, of course they're not going to be here. They have everything they want in Glendale already. Why would they come to you? They've been authorized by the Public Utilities Commission to put as many cars out there as they want. There's nothing that your board can do about it. So of course they're not here. That would be, with all due respect, it wouldn't be a good use of their time. Now, in all jurisdictions, they just start operating. They do not come in through the front door of City Hall asking to be permitted. They use the term launch whenever they open up in a new market, which means that they're just going into operation without any permits. If local authorities take notice of their unlicensed operations and call for regulation or enforcement, the TNCs roll out their lobbyists, lawyers, and public relations machine, often with the support of local media and elected officials. They unleash an army of online supporters, or what seems to be an army of online supporters, but it's probably more likely they're sort of in-house employees doing what used to be called an AstroTurf operation, only through email. They publicly decry the supposed sorry state of the local taxi industry, claiming that any regulations aimed at TNCs are unfair, anti-competitive, and an attempt to protect a corrupt taxi and/or limousine industry and stifle innovation. But they always say it's non-competitive to regulate them. And I really have not. I'm waiting to hear the argument as to why that would be. Regulators who speak out about them are demonized and ideally silenced. Their attitude is, stop us if you can. If you can't stop us, then we are entitled to operate freely. If they're issued cease and desist letters, as they were by me in June of last year, they ignore them, continue operating unless their drivers are cited and arrested. So that's basically the template for every jurisdiction they go into. Now, locals rarely see them coming and often don't understand what is happening before the TNCs have a very firm foothold. The discussions on whether to let them into the local market and how to regulate them creates what seems to be a unique conundrum for the community, while for the TNCs, it's just another day at the office using their standard playbook. And I want to emphasize once again that the only customers they're interested in are the affluent and able-bodied. If you want to sum it up in a simple term, it's cherry picking. That's what they do. How are we doing for time? I'm kind of running out.
You're fine. You're fine. I mean, this is an informative session for all of us, especially for me. So, how much more time you need?
About 3 or 4 minutes.
Please continue.
Yeah. So in my jurisdiction of Los Angeles, the TNCs have effectively scooped up a big chunk of the upscale taxi market, which is exactly the segment of the market taxi operators depend upon to make it financially viable for them to meet all the regulatory standards I already mentioned. They make their profit from the high-end customers so they can afford to go to what we call the underserved areas of town where there aren't venues and attractions that generate business. But I want to point out, in LA, we have substantial requirements for taxi cab companies to convert to hybrids and place wheelchair-accessible vehicles into service. We basically have about 2/3 of our fleet is what would be considered green or hybrid at this point in time. I wanted to mention the Public Utilities Commission because they're the ones that kind of unleashed all of this. When Uber and Lyft first came into business, really, and seriously got into business in California, was just 2 years ago, and they, of course, had no permits. So the Public Utilities Commission issued them a cease and desist notice, and then they rolled out their lobbyists and got them to produce what they called interim license agreements, which basically sort of gave them a green light to just keep doing what they were doing and rescinded the fines that they were going to assess them. PUC had a rulemaking process last year where many people told them exactly what was going to happen, and they ignored it. We said there would be a proliferation of vehicles, and we said that, those of us who are critical, that you're rewarding this open permitting system to companies that already showed bad faith by going into business without permits in the first place. Now, I'm not against innovation, and I know that these services are popular with the upscale younger folks, and that's understandable. But so are bootleg DVDs. Those are popular with some segments of the public too, as are designer handbags and clothes that are false. And there's really kind of like a false environment the TNCs for their competitiveness because they're not paying for the insurance and the other regulations that I've mentioned. But what's really been distressing, though, is that the Public Utilities Commission asserted authority over them. They created kind of a subcategory of limousines, otherwise known as charter party carriers, for them, and they gave them a set of rules which are basically allow them to regulate themselves. But they don't adhere to regulations. They just it doesn't matter what the regulations are going to be. It's interesting that June 10th, President of the PUC sent a letter out to the different transportation network companies, documenting the violations that are going on at airports. And they said in their letter, President Peavy said, San Francisco International Airport reported that out of 300 contacts it has had with drivers for TNCs, the majority of whom were UberX drivers, 70% of their cars did not display proper trade dress on their vehicles. Moreover, none of your firms have obtained a permit from the airports to transport passengers to or from airport facilities, even though they're required to have permits from the airports. Numerous TNC drivers did not have proof of insurance on their persons, and TNC drivers have been repeatedly observed picking up passengers at various airports, even though doing so violates local ordinances. And then there's no other violations, lack of insurance. The person is supposed to be the driver is not the driver. Even a lack of a driver's license here and there. This just reflects the fact that the PC just really doesn't have a handle on what's going on. And this was borne out by the audit that was released last week that made the news, some of you may have heard about, an audit from the state auditor, the state of California, who concluded that the California Public Utilities Commission has failed to adequately ensure consumers' transportation safety, does not appropriately collect and spend fees from passenger carriers. And rather than get into that, all that information is online, California State Auditor. And I guess the question is, well, where does that leave us? Like I said, I understand that these services are popular with a lot of people. They seem to be popular with young attorneys more than anybody. And I don't go through life trying to be a party pooper or. I've served the public. I'm not trying to tell the public what is right or wrong. But my 28 years with the city, I've always fought for fairness and equity. And these companies, in my view, are not competing on a level playing field. And I think it's reasonable for them to be held to account for their insurance. I would hope at some point in time someone would say, so many vehicles is enough. I know there's a libertarian kind of view saying, well, put as many people want to be in the business out there on the streets and then the market will take care of itself. Well, that really doesn't work in the vehicle for hire industry. And a classic example of that is the city of Santa Monica. They had an open permitting system up until about 5 years ago. And they had gotten to 650 taxi permits for a city of 90,000. 650. We've got 60 in Glendale. It has 200,000 people. So there wasn't enough business in Santa Monica, so they were coming to L.A. to poach business. They had nowhere else to go. It makes sense to. There is such a thing as public convenience and necessity. There is such a thing as setting up a competitive environment without, you don't have to stifle competition altogether. You set up an environment where people can compete fairly, and then you have good service. But if the legs are taken out from under the regulatory system, then you're going to have a chaotic system. Now, the taxi cab companies, when you see articles in the news and on TV, they'll interview a cab driver and they'll say it's unfair for these companies to be here, and then the reporter will say, well, they're saying it's unfair, and TNCs are saying that they just can't handle the competition. They're new and they're innovative. But But the point is, what's fair? What is fair and what is reasonable? What's going on now is we in LA are having trouble finding drivers to get into cabs and to serve the hard-to-serve areas of town and to provide the wheelchair-accessible service. It's a full-blown crisis for the cab industry in San Francisco. It's bad here, not quite as bad as it is in San Francisco. But there's a real question for you folks as to whether or not you're going to have a taxi industry in this town another year or two the way things are going. The last time I took a cab in Glendale, I actually ordered it for a guest at my house. The driver said, he's not making it, he's going to sell his cab. But, taxis are a utility. They're meant to be there 24/7. They're meant to serve everybody. It's a really difficult situation for them. But, but do want to take the long view, though. I mean, 2 years ago, no one even heard of these companies, and it takes more than a couple of years for something to become an institution, and a lot of variables. It's like we have our foot midstream in some wild rapids now, and it's very uncertain how things are going to turn out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you take some questions?
Sure.
Oh,
Fellow
yeah, I'm
commissioners?
ready to go. I agreed with you 100% on your, well, first of all, thank you for your presentation. But I do agree with you on your viewpoint of this. I'm infuriated. There were some points, probably just because of your constraint of time, maybe you didn't bring up, but I'd like to ask you about them. First of all, these, we're talking, I believe they must be regulated, absolutely, positively, with the insurance. But beyond the insurance, there's this idea of public safety that really concerns me. One being that of sexual assault. The idea of a passenger getting in, and from what I've understood, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Uber drivers have access to the passenger's full name on a trip sheet that they can get. So if you have a person who's, in that car, in that vehicle, and you have a creepy driver who, from what I understand, are not required to have criminal background checks, we're opening up a recipe for disaster, for safety for these people. I mean, am I wrong in characterizing it like that?
I don't think so. No, I share your concern.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and another thing is, they have the address, phone number, and the credit card information. And by the way, that's another kind of profitable sector of these companies that doesn't get discussed much, is that they've got an incredible database of folks that have credit cards.
And I find that objectionable that we're allowing this to continue on without this regulation, without some sort of control on who these people are. Do they pass the test? If you're in a taxi cab and you're not happy with the way the taxi cab driver drives, you can look on the wall, get that number, call that number, probably while you're in the taxi cab, read off the license number, give them the full name of the driver, and have some sort of recourse if there's some terrible event. In the course of this, I don't know what recourse the passenger has, and there's another big issue that really concerns me. It's never really on everyone's top talking point, but that of sex trafficking. That's a big issue now in global discussions, and as this is going global, if I'm in that terrible criminal business of sex trafficking, I'm going to like to have an Uber driver ready at the airport for me, because no one's going to be checking up on where, what this is all about and who this is. That really disturbs me. I don't like that lack of, oversight. So those are my big concerns. I can go on and on and on, but those are my two big ones: is the safety, the possibility of sexual assault, and it's starting to pop up around the country. We're getting the more and more cases, and then what's going to happen is, maybe you can tell me what will happen. It will be too late to then go back and try to get control over the team of wild horses that have escaped. I don't know.
Well, it seems like something bad has to happen. Like the little girl getting run over in San Francisco before anyone really looked seriously at the insurance issue. But I share your concerns.
Okay.
Thank you.
again, thanks for coming, Tom, and sharing your thoughts with us. Let me ask you, you're basically a staff employee at City of Los Angeles?
Right.
So you're not with any nonprofit or any other group
No, I'm City of Los Angeles Department of Transportation. And my association with the IATR, which is the Regulators Association, that's voluntary as well. And by the way, we have a really good website, IATR. You can just Google it, and there's a lot of information. One of the things we have is we've developed model regulations, which fortunately we can't apply in California, but are being looked at very seriously by regulators around the country on this particular subject. But the end of my sales pitch for my association.
Going back to unfair competition, I mean, versus Uber versus taxis, I don't particularly care for that. I mean, look at if it's any unfair, Costco and Walmart of the world competing with good old grocery stores and whatnot that everybody's having trouble with. I'm a very forward and technology savvy person, but in this case, safety is, I think, the most important thing. Safety of passengers. As Commissioner Yakubian alluded, that safety is a problem with these. And from what you said earlier, so these folks are going in and out of the airports without any permits?
Yes.
And cities are allowing that without them able to make any kind of money from the airports, because cities love to make money off taxi and taxi taxes.
Right. I'm not familiar with what your price per trip is at the Bob Hope Airport. I'd imagine it's at least a couple $. Do you happen to know, Aaron?
I don't. I haven't looked at the latest.
At LAX, they pay $4 a trip for a taxi cab, and then the industry pays a leasehold of $600,000 a year. Their holding lot area. So, and then of course, it's another thing. We get back to fees and what's fair and what's not. Taxi cabs in LA pay $3 million a year in franchise fees, another $1 million a year in permitting fees for individual drivers and vehicles. Then they pay another about $3.5 million at the airport for airport access.
And these guys get away with it.
Right? Well,
okay.
You can't regulate them. So.
Another question that I have is, is there any log of how many hours can these folks be behind wheels?
Well, there's California law says you can only drive for 10 hours at a time. I think I have it here. Let's see. 10 hours consecutive or 10 hours total spread over 15 hours in a 24-hour period. That's in the California Vehicle Code, or vehicle for hire drivers. I will say, in terms of taxi drivers, it's very tough to enforce. In the city of LA, we allow them access to the airport once every 5 days. We've broken the fleet up into 5 sections, and drivers really want to put in the long hours on the airport day because that's where they make the bulk of their money, especially now. And it's tough to police, but to answer your question, it is supposed to be 10 hours.
But don't taxi drivers have dispatch that they tells them where to go, and doesn't dispatch know where they are? Especially nowadays with...
Yes, with GPS,
with
they do know where they are. And that's another point to make, is that taxis are not just country bumpkins behind the wheel anymore. I mean, they have computerized dispatch. They have their own apps. They have digital taxi meters. They have GPS. They have a lot of technology.
But Uber driver is independent, right? They can be driving 24 hours and nobody will regulate them.
No one would know that. Okay. At the airport dispatching company would know if a driver's been behind the wheel too long. It is tough to police. I will say that. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen sometimes. They put in longer hours than they should.
Besides that, one of my friends was out there trying to buy a SUV, and he said he had a hard time getting one because Uber drivers are just bought all the SUVs that's out there, like Suburbans and so forth. He had to go out there and had a hard time getting one. After that, caught my attention that they're all over meandering and creating traffic with his SUVs with the TCPs labeled right on their bumper. In an era right now where we're pushing public transportation, what's your opinion of these Uber vehicles meandering around and taxis coexisting, and where we're trying to go down, we're trying to encourage public transportation? Where do you think we're going?
Well, it's interesting because they lay claim to getting people out of their cars so that they can drive them, but there's no empirical evidence of that actually happening. What I see happening is that more people are getting into cars to drive for them, so we have more vehicles out on the street and more congestion, and that's part of a lawsuit that's been brought forward by the California Taxi Cab and Paratransit Association. They said that there wasn't a proper environmental study done by the PUC before they issued all these licenses, or just basically opened the floodgates for them to come down, because they actually don't license the individual drivers. But one thing we've been doing for years is setting taxi zones up near metro stations and other areas where there's pedestrian traffic, so that facilitate those trips that the people that don't want to use their own vehicles. But it is a real concern of mine that there's a whole lot more vehicles on the road that are out there looking for business. And I want to tell you too that we do bandit enforcement activities with LAPD through a program that we funded. It's been in operation about 7 years now, 8 years, where we take an extra 20 cents off the flag drop fee for each taxi cab trip, and that goes into a fund, and that we hire LAPD and LADOT investigators to work on an overtime basis to do bandit enforcement. What they're seeing out in the field is the downtime between the phone apps. The TNC drivers will take flag downs and take walk-ups. So it's one of the things we predicted would happen. PUC didn't pay any attention to us. We said they'll be out there hustling. When there's not a phone app going on, they'll be out there hustling. Another thing they do is the regulator in Coachella sent me a news article after the latest round of Coachella festivals down there, which both my daughters attended and came home safely from. Thankful for that. They said the Uber drivers would get together at a certain place, and then when they knew the demand was rising, they would all turn off their apps, which would cause Uber to raise the prices so they could manipulate the prices for what they call surge pricing. So they say they do to get drivers out into circulation. So, but the drivers are very creative, whether the taxis or other vehicles for hire, so they found out a way to manipulate the system.
Interesting. I'm in distribution business, and one of my drivers, many of my drivers, they have friends that are in taxi industry, and some of their taxi driver friends are doing also Uber part-time on their own cars to make additional income whenever they're not behind wheels for a taxi company. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yes, it's an ongoing situation. I mean, it's you have a whole lot less fees and regulations to deal with, so it makes it easier to make money. That's really what it boils down to.
Interesting. And these guys go ahead and discriminate, from what you just said, against handicaps, people who don't have credit cards, seniors, and so forth and so on, and the poor folks down in South Central.
Right.
And get away with it.
So far, yes.
What are the positive points that you have to point for these TNCs? What are their positives that you have versus
The
taxis.
positives?
Positive points, yes.
Well, I think they've made good use of the technology. I think in general, their customer satisfaction levels seem to be pretty high. But, a lot of that is based on the price, which is, in my view, artificially low because of all the regulations that they avoid. I think, this is kind of getting away from your question, but in the long run, it'll be interesting to see how they handle the issue of drivers. Right now, there seems to be very intense competition between Lyft and Uber for drivers, and sometimes one will kind of lowball the other in terms of percentage of the fare that the company keeps as opposed to what they allow the drivers to keep. I think one thing I point out to folks is, I drove a cab in New York many years ago. No idea that I was going to be a regulator someday. And when I started driving in Manhattan, I had about 30 customers a day. And I'm a pretty easygoing guy. I like everybody. 1 or 2 customers a day would irritate me. After 3 months, all but 1 or 2 customers irritated me. And the point I'm trying to make is that driving a vehicle for hire is a very serious business. There's a reason why taxi drivers are often kind of grumpy, because it's tough dealing with the public day in and day out, the driving conditions, and then you add for these TNC drivers, they're putting wear and tear on their cars, and they're driving under this risk of something happening, of being big questions of what happens insurance-wise. And I think those factors in the long run are going to make it tougher and tougher for these companies to find the drivers. That's a long-term problem for them. And we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out.
Thank you, Tom.
Commissioner Lozano.
Yes, thank you for your comments this evening. I'm not sure about the accuracy of these articles, so maybe you might have some information, and this relates to an earlier question. Given the short time that this has been existing, I think 2.5 years, you said, 2 to 3 years, where the TNCs have been operating, that the drivers of those TNCs actually can make more money than the taxi drivers. From the articles that I've read, I don't know, again, how accurate that is. Is there a movement from the taxi cab driver to the TNC companies? Other than the part-time that was referenced earlier, is there any quantifiable?
Well, it's more observed based on observations than quantified, but the answer is yes. Yes, there's definitely a trend. I think, San Francisco, it's a full-out crisis. But what company presidents in L.A. tell me is that they have owner-operators that are owner-drivers, that they're parking their cars on their non-airport days. And then they come and get their car and they work their airport day because that's a good day for them. But the other days they're making more money with Uber or Lyft.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Commissioner Rostro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drishler, for coming. I know that the City of LA makes its staff work very hard, so I appreciate taking your time to come out here.
I volunteered, happily so.
Thank you. So I have seen your name in the paper, and I'm sure that you've read those articles, so I know that your views on TNCs may be somewhat contrary to the mayor's office and Mayor Garcetti. Given all of the information that you've given us today, despite all this, can you tell me why the City of Los Angeles continues to allow Uber and Lyft and these other TNCs to operate?
Well, at this point, it's really in the hands of the Public Utilities Commission and the legislature. There's some bills that are pending now. There's a Nazarian bill, and there's got the name of the other legislator. That's really where the decisions are going to be made. That I work very closely with the mayor's staff. I thought when he came into office and he rescinded the cease and desist letters that I was going to be looking for somewhere else to work. But that has not been the case because they've been very engaging with me and want me to work with them, which I'm happy to do. I'm a loyal city employee. I'm just basic civil servant. I don't have any hidden agendas. But I have been given a green light from the mayor's office to go out and enact arrests of TNC drivers if they're out there hustling, if they're violating their abandoned taxi laws. We're also, but I work closely with the mayor's office. Together, we're looking forward as to what the regulatory landscape is going to look like, depending on the way the legislation and the courts are going. It's possible that right now that the PUC's entire authority over this will get thrown out. It's fairly unprecedented for that to happen, but it's a possibility. I can't predict how things are going to turn out in the future, but I would say as a city family, we're working closely together. We have council offices, the mayor's office, city attorney, and we're going to try to figure out the best way to deal with this once all the dust is settled in terms of what the regulations are going to be.
Thank you. I have a few more comments. You mentioned that these companies try to avoid insurance costs. Now, I have friends that are Uber and Lyft drivers, and I do know that as they go through that hiring process, that they do need to provide documentation that they have insurance. So they are acting as independent contractors, and they do have insurance to cover the work that they're doing. Is that the same for owner-operator taxi vehicles and their drivers? Or is that a different animal?
I have to caution you, I'm not an insurance expert. That's never been my particular forte. But the State Insurance Commissioner has pointed out, and the Public Utilities Commission acknowledged in an amendment to their rulemaking last year that when you're operating a commercial vehicle for hire, insurance companies are going to be reluctant to cover accidents that happen if you're just operating on your own personal insurance. That's what's known as the gap that's shown up in numerous articles in the news. And, thing is, in LA and other cities, your city here, that your vehicles, your taxi cabs are registered as commercial. They have to have commercial insurance, and they're covered 24/7, whether they have a passenger in the car or not. Whereas with the TNCs, there's questions if they don't have a passenger, are they still covered? Uber is saying that the driver that ran over the little girl in San Francisco didn't have a passenger at the time, so they're not liable. He wasn't working for them. He just happened to be driving around San Francisco on New Year's Eve with an Uber car.
So it sounds to me that they are required to have insurance, just as owner-operator taxi cabs are.
They're required to have insurance, but they can't have commercial insurance, which can cover the really big losses. I mean, I think that the drivers face a lot of liability. This question is not settled at all, and I fear for the drivers of the TNCs because they're taking a lot of risk, and just you don't have to take my word for it. You can go on the Uber or Lyft websites, and the languages is all there. It's the drivers and the public that are assuming the bulk of the risk.
The other thing that you mentioned were background checks. Now, these companies do background checks. It's just that, in your opinion, because they do not fingerprint specifically, you do not consider those to be adequate background checks.
Correct.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that point is clear.
And that's one of the things what we're talking about within the city of LA is, we have a permit office where we do fingerprints, about 5,000 to 6,000 fingerprints a year. Because we also permit non-emergency ambulances and other kinds of vehicles for hire that operate in the city of LA. So we'd like some more money for staff if it happens, but otherwise our attitude would be, come on down, we'll do your fingerprints for you.
No, the one comment that kind of took me aback was your idea that these companies do not have mechanisms in place for customer feedback. And I know that that was a concern for another commissioner. I don't know that to be the case. Now, I've used Lyft and I've used Uber personally, and I know that there are customer feedback opportunities once you've used their services. And I know that based on those responses, which go both ways, the driver can rate the customer and the customer can rate the driver. And based on that feedback, Uber and Lyft does what they need to do with those respective parties. And I don't know if that's aired out in the public or not with the drivers. I know that Metro has policies in place where you have an issue with the driver, they take action, and that's not open to the public. So I want to take issue with that because I've used those feedback mechanisms, and I want to make sure that the commissioners know that that is in place.
The communication is by email, correct? So
Yes,
if you have a
it's with yours.
complaint, you would email them saying there's a complaint, and then the rating that you give, which you have to give if you're leaving or sending in a complaint or email, again, is going to be visible to the driver if they get fired or if they're no longer allowed to have a Uber account. They will know who you are. They will know your name. So I guess, yes, there is a mechanism. I mean, I don't know, you tell me, there's a mechanism in place to complain, but then, I don't know if I'd like to complain when I know that the driver who's about to lose that opportunity to make a ton of money knows my name, my full name. So,
and this is the exact point why I wanted to reiterate, and I did say this at the last meeting, that we do need to have reps from those companies present so that they can let us know what these issues are and what the actual facts are. I will be very surprised to see that an Uber driver has access to the customer feedback that they get from their customers. I will be shocked. So I'm not sure that that's the case, and I'm hoping that I have been in touch with Uber and Lyft. They were not able to make this meeting, but I am told that they're trying to make an effort to come to the July meeting. So hopefully these questions could be aired at the next meeting.
But if I may address the accountability issue.
Sure.
One thing that taxi cab companies have is they have road supervisors, so if incidents happen in the field, they can go if there's an accident, and they also have procedures in place for lost and found and customer service, and rating drivers rating passengers back and forth. In my view, that's not really accountability. But although I am worried by the prospect that a driver can rate a passenger for something other than simply whether or not they gave a good tip or they like their looks, or maybe they don't like what ethnic group they're from. I mean, how do you know? That's a scary part of a rating system by drivers of the passengers.
The last point that I had was that you mentioned that these companies target certain areas, and I get that, and I understand the demand issues with that. The one thing that I had an issue with was that you mentioned that they attract affluent and high-end customers. Now, Uber and Lyft charge less than taxi companies, and in my personal case, I use those companies rarely because they're cheaper and because I can afford it. I am not an affluent young person. I work for a nonprofit and I don't make much money. So those two things seem counterintuitive to me, that they attract affluent people and yet they're cheaper. So I do have concerns about the way this has been presented. I was hoping for a more balanced conversation, but it seems like we're not able to have that today. And I will leave it at that. Thank you. But I do appreciate your time and coming out.
I could answer that.
Yes.
I mean, everybody likes a bargain. And, their prices, like I said, are artificially low because they're avoiding all these regulations. But I invite you to take your phone down to 70th and Central and see if you can get them to show up.
Thank you. And I might add to that, the busiest 99-cent store in California is the one in Beverly Hills, just as an FYI. Again, I want to thank you for coming. Your reputation speaks for itself, and I've known you for a long time. The reason I invited you is not just to shed light on this. I was concerned. I was concerned because many of my friends called me, many friends that reside in the city of Glendale, concerned about this, concerned that they have employees that are working for them, but then they moonlight, they work for these other companies, and now they're working 20-some hours, and they show up again, for their morning shift. I was really hoping that Uber and Lyft show up to make a presentation today, and I'm hoping that we can get them to the table again, because I really want to hear that side too. I mean, initially when I heard the idea, I was all for it. It's a great idea, but the more and more I read about it, especially some of the issues that you brought. I mean, I would not take a Lyft or an Uber for the same reason. That if I'm selling an item on Craigslist, I would do it in front of a police station or somewhere where it's busy. And the reason for that is I want to protect myself. I don't know who I'm dealing with. The background check bothers me. The fact that there's no ADA vehicles bothers me. But I still think it's an industry. It's here to stay. I think if it is regulated, it could be an asset as long as it's done in a way to improve mobility, less vehicles on the street. So we need more information on this and more education. And one question that I have, has other cities done anything about it where they said, okay, you cannot operate within our city limits because of this and this?
Well, there are battlegrounds all over the world over this, from Berlin to Paris, London, Miami, Houston, Chicago, Madison, Seattle. And like I said in my remarks, in each of these jurisdictions, the folks there think they have kind of a unique situation they're dealing with, whereas the TNCs are doing what they do in all markets. But there's a lot of controversy. There are places where they're not allowed. They're not allowed in Las Vegas. Allowed in Madison. They're still trying to break into Houston market, to Miami. So there's a lot of battlegrounds out there, and there's a lot of controversy. It's not just in California.
One last question.
Yes. Speaking about insurance, when Commissioner Barstow brought it up earlier, for example, in the case of that girl where there was no coverage, I guess, when the taxi was dropped off and hit this little girl in San Francisco, what happens?
The Uber, not the
I'm sorry, the Uber. What happens if I took one of these TNCs and told the driver, come back and pick me up in half hour? And in order for him to avoid paying a commission to his company, his TNC, showed up over there and made some money and took me from point A to point B. Will I not be covered by insurance at that time because the guy was not logged in or because I did not call?
Yeah. My reading of their policies is that they consider him not covered, at least not through the company. I guess perhaps his private vehicle insurance.
What about? Isn't taxi fares regulated? Don't we have certain fees for taxis? And how are these guys adjusting it up and down, like you were saying in Burlingame? That part I didn't understand. Don't they have fixed rates like taxis do?
I can't really speak to their rates, although I know they have what they call surge pricing, where during peak times they raise their rates, ostensibly to attract more drivers. But in the city of LA, we have what we call taxi cost index, which is tied to the consumer price index, and rates are set. And say the last 2 years, according to our reading of the index, they're entitled to a rate increase, but they've declined it because of they don't want to be even in a less competitive position than they are now, TNCs.
One more question to Mr. Golanian. The taxi drivers that we have, do we collect money from them when they fingerprint and like he was inviting us to Los Angeles, and do we make money off of them?
Chairperson Sahakian, Commissioner Kirkjian, we collect fees from the taxi cab companies. Now, the fingerprinting and background check, we can do it at the city. We have the means, but we cannot force them to come to the city facility.
But do we collect money from individual driver or only company?
From the company.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you again.
Thank you, Commissioners. It's been enlightening for me, and I hope that I've enlightened you a little bit on this subject as well. Thank you to staff as well.
Thank you.
Next item.
Item 8, report only. At item 8A is the report regarding the City of Glendale Bicycle and Pedestrian Report. At item 8A1 is a motion to note and file the City of Glendale Bicycle and Pedestrian Report.
Chairperson Sahakian, members of the Commission, the report in front of you and the ensuing presentation is regarding the 2013 City of Glendale Bicycle and Pedestrian Report. This report contains essentially pedestrian and bicycle counts that were conducted in September of 2013. Thanks to Walk by Glendale and over 100 volunteers who participated in the process and the counting. It's a very interesting and useful tool for us to use as staff. And I'm going to let Mr. Michael Nilsson, our Senior Mobility Planner, to give you a brief presentation and go into more details, including the background, purpose, and the findings of the report.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be going over the purpose, first the purpose of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Report. The City of Glendale Bicycle and Pedestrian Report serves multiple purposes, from identifying trends in walking and bicycling, to evaluating the effectiveness of infrastructure installed, to determining the need of future bicycle and pedestrian programs and projects. The counts have also been evaluated against collision statistics to assess bicycle and pedestrian safety, with the goal of promoting awareness for bicycling and walking in Glendale. In regards to the methodology of the bicycle and pedestrian counts, we conducted those counts on September 25th and September 28th, 2013. There was 30 intersections that were counted, which was consistent with the 2009 and 2010 counts. So same count locations, same time of year that was counted. In regards to getting the count together, it involved a significant effort on the behalf of Walk by Glendale, who recruited, trained, and organized over 100 volunteers, while the city provided the funding to evaluate the counts and the collision data. In regards to the process for collecting the data, we went through the same process that the Southern California Association of Governments, as well as Metro. So Glendale's count data can be compared to data for the overall region. In fact, our data is included with the regional data, which is available as part of the SCAG and Metro Regional Database, which could be accessed on www.bikecounts.luskin.ucla.edu. In regards to the results of the 2013 count data, in many ways it reflects the increase of bicycle infrastructure that we've installed in the city since 2010. We had about a 36% increase in bicycling since then. Countering that was a minor decrease in pedestrian activity, about 3% decrease since 2010. However, the intersections with high volumes of pedestrians and bicyclists were consistent with prior count years. One of the things that is of concern that the data identifies was the collision data. which bicycle collisions have increased dramatically in the city from 2007 to 2011, about 65%, and also pedestrian fatalities have increased as well. We've had 6 fatalities in 2013 and 3 so far in 2014. Also noting in the report was the collision rates for the over 65 population, the senior population in Glendale, who are twice as likely to be involved in pedestrian accidents versus other population groups in the city. In regards to recommendations from the report, in many ways the recommendations from this count are similar to and directly reference recommendations that were in the Safe and Healthy Streets Plan as well as the adopted Bicycle Transportation Plan. This includes conducting bicycle and pedestrian counts ideally every year, but at a minimum every other year. Preparing a report that analyzes count and collision data once every 2 years. Comparing that count data with regional counts. Prioritizing implementation of programs and infrastructure based on results of data, and securing additional funding for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure based on information collected. Since we've received this result, staff has gone after about $5 million in bicycle and pedestrian projects, including the Green Streets demonstration project on Harvard Street and Louise Street in downtown Glendale. We got confirmation from the California Natural Resources Agency that we received $1 million of funding on June 3rd this year. That will be for a variety of pedestrian safety improvements and more street trees, mid-block crossings. We've also gone after 4 different grant applications from the Active Transportation Grant Program through Caltrans. This includes $500,000 in funding for a citywide safety education initiative that would create educational programs to promote pedestrian and bicyclist safety throughout the city of Glendale. We've also gone after $500,000 in funding for a citywide pedestrian plan to assess pedestrian infrastructure and propose improvements to that infrastructure citywide. $1.6 million in safe routes to school improvements, as well as $1.5 million to help create a citywide bicycle share and bicycle station network. This report and the data and the results from it has enabled the city to further its commitment to apply for resources and grants to improve bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and as well as go after funding that will improve bicycle and pedestrian safety. And with that, we will also present this report to the City Council on July 22nd, 2014. And that concludes tonight's presentation, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have on the report.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to start from my left this time.
I don't have too many questions because I've seen the report as a Walk by Glendale member and as somebody who collected the data. I just want to acknowledge all of the volunteers that took the time to conduct the counts. As Mr. Nielsen mentioned, there were 30 intersections counted, but there were oftentimes 2 volunteers per intersection, and there were 3 shifts for each location. So there was the morning count, the evening count, and a count on the weekend. So altogether, I think it was over 150 volunteers that put in their time to collect the data. So I wanted to acknowledge their time. The one thing that I found really interesting about the report is that there was a 36% increase in bicycling. In the past couple of years, we have not seen much bike improvements in the city. There have been a few, but not many compared to cities around us like the city of Los Angeles and Burbank that have been putting in bike lanes all over the place. We have a higher increase in bicycling than those cities do. The city of LA also did a bicycle count last year, much along the lines of how we did it here, and they had a very modest increase. I think it was in the single digits. So that's very promising and something to keep in mind as we look forward to improvements in the city. One thing that I wanted to point out is Flower and Sonora continues to be the #1 intersection that sees the most bicyclists. And my theory is that there's nearby Disney and DreamWorks that actually pay their employees to ride their bike to work. I think it's $1.50 or $2 every day if an employee rides their bike to work. And I'm happy to hear that we may be seeing bike lanes on Sonora soon, which means we'll see a connection to the Riverside bike lanes that we have and the bike lanes on Glen Oaks. So this will be the first time we'll see a bike lane connect to another bike lane in the city of Glendale, which I'm really looking forward to as a bicyclist.
I was under the impression that Verdugo and Honolulu was the highest volume. Am I wrong on that?
That was for one of the shifts, the weekend shift. There are a lot of recreational riders that go through that intersection.
Through Sonora?
Yeah, the #1 is Flower and Sonora.
My office used to be there at Flower and Sonora, and I'm around there all the time. And I believe the reason that increased because that's a connecting thoroughfare to LA LA River bike lane over there.
Yes.
That's. I think that's. I mean, especially over the weekend. I saw in the report also. There's increase in usage. I think that has more to do with the traffic, bike traffic, than Disney does, because I'm there every single day.
Yeah, we just in response to that, the Walk by Glendale does a pit stop on Bike to Work Day, which is in May. So we did one last month, and we have a pit stop where we welcome bicyclists. We give them fruit in the morning. We give out informational material, and we have it at the southeast corner of Sonora and Flower. So we witness at least 100 bicyclists come through there. Many of them are coming up Sonora and turning right onto Flower. So just based on the conversations that we have and the bicyclists that we intercept, they are commuting to work and coming into Glendale. But you're right, the river path also starts off Riverside, and a lot of people use that in the morning to get to work as well.
Let's have the commissioner finish his comments, please.
One tidbit that I think is startling is that only 10% of the riders that we've captured are female. And a lot of times what we do in active transportation when we do studies like this is we use females as the indicator species for safety on the street. So it just goes to show you the huge disparity in women to men riders and their perception of safety on the street. So that's one tidbit I wanted to leave you with. And then the other things that I wanted to mention, and Mr. Nielsen, I'm looking at the draft report, so correct me if I'm wrong, but figure 5.4 does mention, now I'm going into the crash data. So we did a lot of work with compiling data for current usage, but I think the crash data is really the valuable information that this commission can walk away with when we move forward with, for example, what the task force is doing with their recommendations and ultimately the recommendations that we're going to give City Council. Is that we look at the information that we have on tables like this where the consultants have identified intersections that have seen a high volume of collisions. And this particular table at the bottom, you'll notice that it does highlight that they also did a study from 2004 to 2009, and there are parallels between both studies over a course of, I don't know how many years that makes it, 7 or 8 years, that there are some intersections in the city that are particularly dangerous. So Glen Oaks comes up 3 times on this list out of the 10 streets or intersections that are problem spots, and I want to point that out to you. And then lastly, I'm sorry, I read all of this report, so bear with me. Figure 5.7 mentions the top 5 primary collision factors for pedestrians. And I want to bring this up because I've been to several of the community meetings on pedestrian safety. I came to the public meeting that the pedestrian task force had put out, I believe last month or the month prior. And there's a lot of conversation about who our target audience is and who we need to reach out to make the streets safer. whether or not it's inattentive drivers, pedestrians not using signalized crosswalks, not wearing bright enough clothing. This information stands out to me, the fact that 54% of pedestrian injury collisions are the result of a driver violating the pedestrian right-of-way. And the next one is 21% of pedestrians not following the rules of the road. So there's a stark difference there. And I want to point that out because I have heard, just anecdotally and just using the very recent pedestrian deaths as an example, as a way to promote pedestrian education as its top priority. And I think just based on this data that we've seen since 2004, that we need to reorient our priorities. Same thing on figure 5.9, top 5 violations for pedestrian injury collisions, vehicle code violations. Same thing, 50% are violating a crosswalk or encroaching the crosswalk space. The next one is a pedestrian not using a crosswalk, only at 12%. So these numbers are there. These aren't numbers that are statewide or from any other city. This is specific to the city of Glendale. And I think the consultants did a really good job compiling this data and putting it into digestible pieces for us. And I want to make sure that we as a commission take this information very seriously and use it to the best that we can when we make recommendations to City Council to make our streets safer for everybody. So I will leave my comments there. Thank you very much.
Great comments. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gonzalez?
Yes. Yes. First of all, thank you for the information this evening, and I certainly appreciated your comments, Alec, on the report. If you would kindly put up the visual that shows the recommendations, please. Yeah, thank you. What is the objective of going before the City Council relative to these recommendations? Is it an action item or is it an information item?
It's an information item.
So how do we have action on the table relative to some of these recommendations? And why is it only an information item? I mean, I hear some implementation that's happening, but something of this importance, why wouldn't staff be making some recommendations for action?
Chairperson Sahakian, Commissioner Gonzalez, very good question. Essentially, the reason we are not going to City Council with a set of recommendations is because if not a large percentage, most of these recommendations have already been identified and communicated through the Safe and Healthy Street Plan that has been adopted by City Council. Our pedestrian bicycle transportation plan, bicycle transportation plan was adopted by City Council with a large number of recommendations that we are implementing as strategically and as fundings become available as we move forward. Another set of recommendations that will come through your commission in regards to the pedestrian safety aspects of it will be presented to City Council. So there isn't any recommendation within this report that has not been covered or will not be covered under another format to the City Council.
I think I did hear verbally some of the implementation that has occurred, and I really commend the staff and others who have gone after funding from different sources. I heard that. It might be appropriate to put it on a visual of some kind to show what has occurred and what action has taken place so that it is clear. I still, though, wonder why, of something of such importance, there still must be other things that need action and approval from a City Council on such an intense report. And if there are any items that are still missing that need action, it would seem that would be an appropriate time to request it.
Commissioner Gonzalez, we'll take a second look at the entire report and to ensure that we have not missed any recommendation.
So one of them that I would like you to consider, please, if other commissioners concur, is there was a really key word used earlier relative to connection and connectivity, and a lot of intersections were noted, but I don't see any, unless I missed it, I don't see any notion of real true connectivity to bus stops and other places where people can use their bicycles, put them on the buses, and really enhance the opportunity. I don't see that in this report. I see the recommendations prioritizing implementation of programs and infrastructure based on results of data, securing additional funding. The last bullet, I think, is really key. But where is the connectivity besides bicycle lane to bicycle lane? The whole notion of multimodal and the connection of using public transportation and bicycles to really promote a really good, I just don't see that, a really good connection, and maybe I missed it.
No, Commissioner Gonzalez, you haven't missed it. Again, the purpose of this report was not to come up with a set of recommendations as we have covered them in the Safe and Healthy Street Plan and our mobility plan, our bicycle transportation master plan, and in our upcoming pedestrian safety plan. So the purpose here was to conduct the counts, compare them to the previous counts, and so we can tell a difference in increase, decrease in the number of pedestrians and bicyclists, to compare it to other municipalities, to highlight intersections that have a high number of bicyclists and pedestrian activities. And we use this document, as Mr. Nielsen mentioned, as attachment, as an exhibit, as justification when we apply for grants that will assist us in implementing recommendations in our 3 or 4 other plans.
Well, does that seem to imply that there might be a need for a bicycle plan that talks about integrating it with other transportation? I mean, it seems like we've got a good data of where things are and what I read from recommendations, but I miss the notion of how to really make a connectivity for enhancing bicycle riding. I mean, compared to what other cities are doing and what I read, this is just a small step. Not the data, the information we have, but why wouldn't we not be looking at having the funding to do an intense planning exercise on how to enhance bicycle momentum in the city, bicycle riding in the city? It sounds like this was not intended for that.
Exactly.
So then I would suggest, with other commissioners' concurrence, that perhaps a recommendation would be to the City Council to find, in order to enhance bicycle riding in the city and safety, that we develop a master plan to make that happen. And maybe it exists, and I don't know.
Yeah, Commissioner Gonzalez, our bicycle transportation master plan is the document that you're referring to, and that City Council adopted in 2012.
Okay, so just to be potentially embarrassed here, that plan has been before this commission?
I did not work on that plan.
I was fortunate enough to be a commissioner on that bicycle master plan, and it was intensive. It included major blown-up maps of the entire city. It included many different stakeholders from all over the city, and it was very intense. A lot of scribbling, exactly like you were saying. The connectivity issue was really a hot issue when all of that was being put together. So there was, I don't suspect my attending those meetings was a dream. I remember being there and going through all of that work and intensive labor and pushing and pulling with people to try to make compromise on things. And but I thought it was a very good final result.
And Commissioner Gonzalez will be happy to share a copy with you.
I would love to see that. So maybe the question to staff and others who are aware of this, has have some of the recommendations, assuming they were adopted by City Council in that report, has the momentum started to implement those?
Commissioner Gonzalez, absolutely yes. We have, in the past, even before the master plan was adopted by City Council, we had taken into consideration where there was a physical possibility and it made sense to install bicycle lanes, other amenities. And since the adoption on every single project, we take that into consideration. And we may not have done as much as we could have possibly, but since the adoption and since I have taken over the division, we have, in my opinion, come a long way, and we're moving forward at a very fast pace.
And I appreciate that response. And what was the date? What year was that done?
2012, I believe.
2012.
Yes.
And one just final question. On the improvements that are happening on Cañada now, north and south, is there a bicycle lane or something planned for that?
Yes, Commissioner Gonzalez.
It's an actual bicycle lane?
Yes, Commissioner.
North and south?
North and south.
Okay, thank you.
Just real quick on that
Yes,
last
sure.
Cañada note, we did talk previously at this commission about what the proposed sharrows would look like, because I know that the bicycle master plan calls for what is called the super sharrow. I know that there's been issues with the MUTCD and the design standards for sharrows, but I do want to make sure that that conversation has not died and that we look to something other than the standard sharrow per the bike plan.
We have been researching that. We haven't come up with a determined shape or form, again, based on MTUCD's recommendations.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Golanian, not to add more work to staff, is it possible to bring back to this commission an outlook of what's going to be implemented within the next year as far as some of the recommendations that have been discussed? That would give us a good picture of where we're heading.
Chairperson Sahakian, members of the Commission, absolutely will bring our forecast for the next 3 years of
Great.
what's in the planning, design, as well as construction. So that will give you a short time frame and what's ahead in the next 2-3 years.
That's great. And the way I took this study, it is a tool. There's always going to be new recommendations. There's always room for improvement. So not to say that this body cannot make any new recommendations. So we can definitely look into that. And I raised the same questions at the time that you raised, because unless you build a network that is well connected, it's not going to work. Right. It really is not going to work. And when I say that, it's not just the network of bicycle lanes, but it's bringing in the mass transit system into the picture, because often, people, can connect using the bus or even a taxi cab, and we talked about bike racks on taxi cabs, so that was a concern of ours, definitely.
Yeah, Chairperson Sahakian, members of the Commission, I'd just like to add that it was only recently that we have set aside funding for the implementation of the bicycle master plan as a project. We just completed the phase 1. We are going to start on phase 2. But I wish we had the funding that we could go through the entire city and implement all the network that we need. However, it's more cost effective, and it makes sense that when we have a project, ongoing project, that we make these recommendations and the master plan as part of that project, and we get a bit of bigger bang for our bucks. But eventually, we will have the network in place.
Understood. Commissioner Yacoubian, any comments?
Well, my comments are just, first, thank you, Mike, for always educating. When you come, I always know I'm going to be smarter when you leave. I just wanted to I first say that Commissioner Bartershoff made some very poignant observations with the figures and the data, and certainly the information that we get will be presented to the task force as well, so that we can, exactly, as you pointed out, the consistencies in those same locations over the years it's right there. What more could we want as a city to have that information, which is incredible. My second observation, just point, is having been a volunteer for the count, pedestrian count and bicycle count in the past year, not this one, but the one before. I want to say hats off to Walk by Glendale, the volunteers, everyone out there doing it. It's not glamorous, but you get weird stares from motorists and everyone out there. But it serves such an incredible purpose. That's a beautiful example of the community getting involved, putting a piece of a jigsaw puzzle together. And what ends up happening is it being passed on to, these creations of these reports, which are so helpful. And I wanted to, give hats off to the unsung heroes that are behind the scenes, who are putting these grants together. Mike, you're involved in that. I know Fred's over, and I always like to throw something at him. He's behind the scenes, coming up with the funding that makes these plans move. So I know there's many other people that are there doing that work, and so I want to express extreme gratitude. None of this means anything, again, as you pointed out, Mr. Glenion, if we don't have that funding. And this serves as such an incredible tool and vehicle for the city of Glendale to move into the future. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kirkjian.
Okay, Mr. Nelson, thanks for the presentation that you set forth today before us. And to be honest with you, I didn't get a chance to read this entire 90-page report due to time constraints and family obligation over the weekend. But I read through almost half of it, and some of the diagrams that Alec just brought up, Commissioner Bartstroff, was very informational and helpful. And that's something, as Commissioner Yakubian said, will be very helpful for us on the task force, which, especially the intersections. Since joining the task force, my day starts usually at 7:15, 7:20 every morning. Twice in the last 3-4 months, I woke up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, just roamed around the city to see what's going on about accidents, safety, and so forth. I've seen the highest bike traffic on weekdays between 6 to 8 o'clock. And I've seen a lot of bikers going to work during those hours, a lot of them with backpacks, so does the students. Is there a way that we can break this in the future studies as far as, in my observation, there are 3 types of bike riders. Commuters to work, recreation drivers, and those folks that they put their uniforms on and whatnot. They should see them around the weekend on Kenneth Village and whatnot. That they go in groups. Is there a way we can break these down and for us to assess the percentage of the users, why it's increased? Our bike ridership increased due to bike path that was opened up and as a result, Sonora and Flower have more traffic, and there's more traffic along Sonora right now because everybody wants to come down and go down to Riverwalk, or is it people using it to work, or folks that, like myself, used to go down to Santa Monica, for example, to rent a bike and go around, are sticking around town and taking their kids around and riding recreationally. Is that something could be done?
So that was actually kind of a matter of debate that we had with our consultant, because there is obviously at this point there's higher ridership on weekends than there is on weekdays. However, when I looked at the data, I noticed that the ridership that was high on weekdays was in entirely different locations than where the ridership was on weekends. A lot of the weekend ridership is up near Montrose versus the weekday ridership is closer to the downtown area. And the Disney DreamWorks campus Flower and Sonora had fairly high ridership at both. So in terms of identifying those nuances, we saw the members walk by Glendale, and city staff noticed that also, that there's definitely diverse groups of riders, and that commute riders have different needs in different locations versus recreational riders. So I think that in terms of when we go through our next count analysis, we'll definitely take those considerations into account and be able to look at, how we could present that data and analyze that data in the best way possible. I know that in terms of the funding that we had available to do these counts, we had the funding, but the funding was limited. Our hope in terms of going after those grants through Caltrans active transportation is to have that evaluation built in as part of the funding process. And our goal is, in terms of whenever we go after a grant, that the 5 E's in terms of Safe and Healthy Streets Plan, evaluation is one of the critical components of those 5 E's.
That's exactly what I was asking for, because during those 2-hour sessions that I did, most of the bike traffic that I observed, and I live in that part of town, I come towards Julia on this side, was Colorado to Glendale Avenue along San Fernando Road, south of Glen Oaks. There are a lot of folks that I see that using their bike going back and forth to work. And backpacks was something very much in common that most of those folks had in their bags going back and forth to work. I want to have the time, make the time to just do the same thing between 3 to 5 one day. I just simply didn't have the time to do so. See what's kind of traffic's out there between 3 to 5 when these folks are coming back from work and whatnot, what's kind of conditions are out there. I realized in the report that what happened during school hours, what happened when school's out, it's a peak, and this goes down the traffic and bike riders and all that stuff. I realized that that's what alluded me to kind of see what's happening when these folks are returning back from works and where the sort of hot spots or the traffic area spots for the bike riders or our pedestrian safety task force. When we look at analyze these reports, I would like to see where they're at and make a recommendation accordingly in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kurkjian. And on that note, I'm going to add, I also am interested in finding out, and if it's possible, to do a survey with large employers such as Nestle and some of the large companies to see how many people they're riding to work. Obviously, it's challenging to do with the smaller businesses. So, and also schools. And I honestly feel that now that we're building these bike lanes, they're underutilized, and hopefully, we'll get to a point where it starts taking away from vehicle traffic. But I feel that employers and schools are not doing enough, honestly, to encourage bike commuting. As far as the schools, are you aware of any programs that they have to encourage this? For example, do they give you credits for riding bicycles to school for commuting? Have you heard of any such thing?
So from my understanding, I have not heard of any programs, but
this would be one recommendation that maybe we need to start going to the colleges, to the schools, of course, high school level, because, elementary, maybe they're too young, maybe the parents are concerned. But once you get into high school, if you're walking the streets, then you can bike if there are bike lanes to go to school. So that would be one recommendation that I would make. One number that I was concerned with, obviously, we had a 36% increase in ridership, but the number of accidents went up by 65.9%. That is really disturbing. Not sure what's exactly the reason behind it. It's a combination of things. But I think it's also bicyclists that are not following the rules of the streets, and mostly those are the clubs and not the individual bicyclists that are riding back and forth to school or to work, but the clubs that ride 20-25 together, and they just blow through stop signs and not follow the rules. So that's another concern that I brought up when we were working on the master plan. But I think it was expected, obviously, and I think it could be corrected with an educational program to bicyclists. I mean, there's defensive driving classes, but there's no such thing that I know of that the city offers as far as defensive riding, maybe, what to look for, how to ride. So that's another recommendation. And as Commissioner Gonzalez said, I mean, you're going to get more recommendations from this commission. And our goal, my goal, would be that some of those recommendations come to fruition, not just recommendations. I understand the funding, absolutely. It's a challenge, not only, for this, for other projects too. But as long as, we're chipping at the project with a small hammer, and eventually, we'll demolish the whole thing, right? And we'll make it happen. So, and that's why I think looking at the forecast with milestones and to see how this commission can assist you guys, assist staff, it would be great. Great presentation again. Thank you. As always, you do a great presentation, good data. And last, the study was a great study. It was extremely professionally done. I've read thousands of studies, and this is up there. And it's because of the hard work of everybody that, including the volunteers, including some of the commissioners here that put into it, and of course staff. Thank you.
Chairperson Sahakian, in response to one of your questions or recommendations, Erica Camp from Glendale TMA was going to be here present today, but she had not finished her project. She's starting a social media campaign, Go Glendale, and she will be here with a short presentation next meeting, and you'll have an opportunity to ask those questions. She represents a large number of our large employers who encourage alternative modes of transportation for their employees.
Great. You reminded me. Are we doing anything as far as a cyclovia type of an event within the city? I know that I was pushing for it, and I know staff attended the MTA workshop. Have we made any headway on that?
Chairperson Sahakian, member of the commission, you are correct. We attempted, and we made, with the help of Commissioner Bartusov, we tried to have it scheduled in the city of Glendale. We missed the opportunity narrowly, and the Cyclavia folks had overcommitted themselves and couldn't accommodate us. But I don't have the details as of now, but we are within the city hoping to have a schedule and plan a mini Cyclavia within the borders of the city of Glendale in the next coming months.
Great. Thank you. If there are no further comments, next item, please.
Item 9 is commission staff comments, updates.
Any comments?
Oh, I do. It's a good one. I think so. I want to, and I've done it privately, but would now like to publicly congratulate Mr. Rubik Golanyan for his confirmation of his appointment on June 3rd by the City Council as Director of Public Works. Your extremely strong leadership skills, your tackling of monumental projects, your engineering background, your commitment to Glendale for nearly 15 years makes you just the perfect person for that job. And I take great pride that you like to hang out with the TPC. So hopefully that will stay the case now that you are a busier man. But I wanted to congratulate you.
I truly appreciate your kind words, and
absolutely,
and my skill set probably got enhanced because I was hanging out with the commission.
That's it.
I would like to echo what Commissioner Yakubian just said, and I read in the newspaper. And I said, wow, that's Rubik. And he got a promotion, and we're happy to be working together. And it was a privilege for me to work with you in the past year. I'm looking forward to many more years. Thank you.
Commissioners, any comments?
I just have a couple comments.
Yes.
Of course, I also echo the comments that have been made. Vivek and communicated that a few weeks ago. Do you have any update on the Mountain 2 freeway lane thing? I know about 3 or 4 months ago it was in process, but
Chairperson Saak and Commissioner Gonzalez, this should be of no surprise, but we hit a wall with Caltrans, and we're chipping away at it. But verbally, they have approved the plan. We are waiting for an encroachment permit because some of the work will be conducted within their jurisdiction. We're pushing as much as you can push Caltrans to get it all at least in writing. But once that's done, we're ready to move forward.
well, thank you. I was reminded because this morning on the way up there were at least 15 to 18 cars queued in to make a right-hand turn.
I also observed that this morning. It was terrible.
I know. Also, you had, in our last discussion, talked about meeting with the city manager on where we might be with a strategy and potentially a recommendation coming from this commission regarding starting some dialogue with Metro. I'm talking about light rail and potential bond that might be coming up that we should, I think the city should be in the forefront of supporting.
Sure. Commissioner Gonzalez, I did consult with the manager, and he and I are going to meet with council member and a member of the Metro board, Ara Najarian, to get his suggestions for what we can do to move forward.
Oh, good. So we will hear back on those, hopefully?
Yes, the wheels are in motion.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And in the meantime, if any of the commissioners have any suggestions, any recommendations for any funding, definitely I think we should bring it to staff's attention so they can discuss those with the councilman. And I mean, honestly, the idea is identify the projects, go to Metro, and if there's a bond measure or an extension to Measure R, make sure that, those are included right off the get-go so we can ensure, funding for them.
It may mean putting some money on the table to get some of those studies done.
Yes, yes.
So that Metro knows that our city is serious.
Serious about it, yes.
I would hope that would be discussed with the council member.
Yes. Okay. I knew you were going to get the position, so, well done. Yes, Mr. Golanian.
If the commissioners are done, I have one update to report to you.
Absolutely. Please.
Chairperson Sahakian, members of the commission, as you may recall, in April, we had 2 workshops regarding the pedestrian safety, arranged by Pedestrian Safety Task Force. It went very well. The report by California Walks, as well as University of Berkeley Transportation Research and Education Center, Safety Trek, was submitted to us. We shared it with the members of the task force. On May 22nd, we held a very interesting and lively meeting with the members of the task force. The report essentially, in a nutshell, had identified 3 E's: engineering, enforcement, and education. And our goal was to go over the report and custom fit it to the needs of the city, getting feedback and input from the members of the task force. Because of the passion of I would say, the members of the task force, we only managed to cover 1 E that evening, and I had noted and promised that I will bring a report to the commission in a meeting of June. However, we have 2 more E's to go through, so Anush has scheduled another meeting for July 2nd. Again, we will work very hard to try to cover those 2 E's and be able to bring a report back to your commission in our meeting in July, which is July 24th.
Yes.
And that said, we have to postpone at least for a month our goal of taking your recommendation to City Council. That will be in August.
Right. Okay, any other comments?
Well, do you have any updates on Doran crossing, Doran and San Fran Road and Brazil Street?
Chairperson Sakian, Commissioner Kirkjian, as far as Broadway Brazil crossing is concerned, City of LA contractor had started work, and they have progress that, at least in my opinion, better than we had hoped for, and we are optimistic that the work will be done by the end of the summer and be able to open the crossing sometime in September, October of this year. As far as Doran Crossing is concerned, the Metro staff and their consultants, HNTB, are working on releasing the EIR that would include options that had been discussed with the community, and we're awaiting the release of that EIR, basically.
Thank you.
Mr. Golanian, one thing that come to mind is once these recommendations are back in August, what we should be doing, we should be talking to other cities, sister cities, and see what are they doing for pedestrian safety. I know there's a huge movement now in the city of LA, and they have a task force that is addressing this issue. They're putting a master plan together. It's going to take some time to come up with it, but I think there's a lot to be learned, and cities should help each other to come up with these ideas.
Person Sakian, that's a great idea, and we'll move forward with that.
Thank you. And with that, last item, please.
Item 10, adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
So move.
Seconded.
Thank you.